I'm ashamed I did. I'm so ashamed.
Always underwear.
But I'm so ashamed.
But it's not clean.
You don't have to look at your underwear. You have to look at your ass.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, you ready? Wait, let me unzip. Okay.
Wait,
Do we have to look over our shoulders?
No, it'll come out
in the same one-stop shopping center.
How long are we going to do this?
Enough so that they can get a good view, all right?
To cut.
Don't
40 years ago.
No, well, but now he said, I want gays in the military, I want this, I want that, and they were all high ideals during the campaign. Yes, during the campaign.
Yeah, but I mean that to me is a low ideal. But
and
anyway.
now it's like he's saying that the emperor has no clothes, but he's the fucking emperor. That's my problem.
Yeah, but the theory was that he was an idealist in his first governorship, and then he lost. You know, he was not reelected. After that, he learned how to compromise, and his first compromise, I think, was with the biggest corporation in the state, the Chicken Corporation. Yeah.
Well, you know,
it's been down. Well, I think
do you vote?
Niagara Falls.
There was dumping chicken shit in the river.
The chicken shit of Arkansas almost destroyed his campaign. Actually.
You know, at first, the only things we knew about him was that he dodged the draft, and Jennifer showed him her flowers. And it's been downhill ever since.
I don't like him for being for capital punishment.
Yeah, right.
No, so you know, but
Yeah, but what's left?
do you vote?
Did you vote for him?
Sometimes I vote. I didn't vote for him. No, I voted for the socialist.
I finally think of politics as like the missing link between the status quo and the force of evolution. And so, you know, in order to be a politician, you apparently have to take. There are exceptions, like Bernie Sanders, the socialist senator from Vermont, or is he a congressman from, you know, and there are a few others, and you even see them get caught. I really respect Ron Dellums, and he was always questioning the military, and suddenly he's head of that committee, but he's has to defend and try and hold on to the military bases in California because that's his constituency and that's their jobs.
Yeah, so, well, it's sort of if push a little further and you got the Eichmann argument. The thing is, people are deluded by the whole constitutional system. They think that...
well, wait, say what you mean by the Eichmann argument, because there's probably viewers who are young enough not to know that Adolf Eichmann...
Well, they're just following the institutions. They're caught in a vast machine.
As Adolf Eichmann
and they do the best they can. I'm sure he tried to arrange comfortable trains for the people that were being sent to their execution.
Not even.
And it wasn't easy, right? So it's sort of a big hype, and it's a displaced. It's all a fraud. So that's what you lose. I don't mind if you vote without illusions. You see, there are some that are less bad than others.
Well, yeah, I didn't vote for Clinton and Gore so much as I voted against Bush and Quayle. I would be really gloomy if they were in.
Well, you know that saying that if voting could do anything real, it would be prohibited. There are a lot of other ways to change things besides voting. It's, you know, there's direct action. And if we're going to vote, what we need is like a new constitution. We need a new party. Here's the only country in the Western world, the only industrialized nation that doesn't even have a labor party. You know, we're incredibly backward here, and we have, you know, Gore Vidal said that we have two wings of the same party, the Democrats and the Republicans, and it's the capitalist party that we have. We don't have a choice.
Labor parties in a lot of countries are much like the Democrats here.
Huh.
Yeah, but in some countries they're not, and at least, for instance, if there was some movement. But here it's just been a continuous deception since the...
England, Australia, New Zealand.
when the country was started, the power was pushed as far away as possible from the people. You know, there was a reason why the delegates to the Constitutional Convention ordered all notes to be burned. They didn't want...
the first cover-up.
Yeah, they didn't want what was discussed there to become known.
They kept the windows shut in the middle of the summertime, too, so no one could sit under the window and eavesdrop.
Wow.
And Benjamin Franklin, I hope you can hear this. Benjamin Franklin was assigned a muzzle because they used to go through cases of wine at the end of the day in the local tavern.
That's the
And
good
when
part.
it had a few, he'd start talking about stuff he
Unbelievable.
shouldn't. So there was a guy who
Kind of a
was
Martha Mitchell
assigned
kind of
to
thing?
him to say, Ben, shut up. Don't talk about that.
Wow. Did you know George Washington grew hemp?
Yeah, but he
And
didn't smoke it because people didn't smoke
he
it.
made it in brownies.
No, it was.
And he got the munchies, and he ate all of Martha's
rope
candy.
and paper were made out of it.
Is that where he lost all his teeth?
It was
And-
a cash
oh,
crop.
yeah,
It was a
right.
cash crop. But did you know that only 10% of the population could vote, according to the first Constitution? Women couldn't vote, black people couldn't vote, Indians couldn't vote, and you had to own property to vote. So that was a real democracy with 10% of the population.
Well, there's a story in my book. I was a child prodigy violin player and was the youngest ever to play in Carnegie Hall at the age of 6. And then I gave it up because I had a technique for playing the violin, but I had a passion for making people laugh. And in 1978, I think it was, I was invited to dinner at the home of Tom Laughlin, who played Billy Jack in that series of movies. And he's a real enthusiast for Thomas Jefferson, and he has Thomas Jefferson furniture and Thomas Jefferson chinaware and Thomas Jefferson recipes that they made. We had peanut soup, and he had Thomas Jefferson's violin. And he handed me, this was Billy Jack handing me Thomas Jefferson's violin, a very dreamlike incident. Yeah, and he said, and he asked me to play something on it, and I hadn't played the violin in like 40 years, and so I took it, and I felt very strange. And I said, I'd like to dedicate this to Thomas Jefferson's slaves, and then I played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but you know. And then I told this to Danny Sheehan of the Christic Institute, you know, and because he's a real Thomas Jefferson enthusiast. He said, well, you have to understand that he was a victim of the social customs at his time, meaning Jefferson. But maybe I'm projecting, but I can't imagine myself having a slave.
Yeah, well, you have to be.
Unless
You're a victim.
well,
I mean, he was.
unless you like to be
quite well
spanked.
off.
The heroes have to be better than their time. That's why we respect them.
Oh, okay, that's good. The heroes, I want to remember that. The heroes have to be better than their times. All right, I may quote that and give
Well, in
you.
the light of
Also, the best part of the Constitution are the amendments, the first 10. That's a strange instrument then that we use to govern ourselves with the best part of the things that had to be pasted on later.
Do you think it's the Constitution that's wrong, or just that everything's been perverted over time?
Both. I mean, the Constitution was wrong, and
Why?
it's been a good instrument for the ruling class. It served them well for 200 years. They respect it, and they point to it, and they change it slightly to advance their own interests. You can have amendments that will bring it back from what I consider true democracy. I mean, it's possible.
Paul, if you were to be a part of a third-party movement in this country, what would it look like for you to join it?
I guess it would be a combination of the Greens and the Libertarians and the anarchists. But I mean,
what parts?
well, you know, the parts of the Libertarians are where there's pro-choice, whether it comes to drugs or abortions. The Greens, because of the ecological concern. The anarchists, because you don't have to go to their meetings.
You forgot the workers. The workers?
Farm,
and the small farmers.
Oh.
There's still some of them around.
Oh yeah, and part of the labor. You know, the best of each. It would be eclectic, and it would just be an ideal. It would be, you know, a humane party. It would be where the needs of the people. It would be a power that exercised power with compassion. I mean, that's the trouble today, in a nutshell. That the use of power without compassion. So I mean, that would be the bottom line.
And how does that vision that you just articulated differ from the vision that you and your compadres had in 1968 when you went to Chicago?
Well, that was an ideal vision then too.
Is it different, similar? How so?
Well, now we would use computers. I mean, the technology changes. It's different. Then there was not an awareness. You know, all of the male leaders of the yippies and the mobilization and all the other groups then got all this publicity, and a lot of the women did behind-the-scenes work and didn't get credit for it and were really necessary. And it would be different today. Certainly, there would be a lot of people in that time had no awareness that they were chauvinistic in their behavior.
Mhm.
So that would certainly change.
Why is it Anita Bryant like a Polish lesbian?
Because she likes to fuck men.
The main failure of the 60s, I think, was that it was a youth movement, and a movement that was based, although part of it was a movement of the minorities in this country for justice, it was based on a single issue against the war. So what happened was that movement, primarily of youth, didn't link up with the rest of life, with the people who were working, with their parents, and with the people who weren't middle class. It was middle class youth more. So although it seemed very strong and powerful at the time, it really collapsed when the Vietnam War ended, although it continued with many strands, right. But there is no linkage with the vast majority of ordinary people who work for a living. And,
but I think that's
in England, you have a huge Labour Party, which, in spite of all of its faults, exerts a huge pressure. For instance, England has a national health plan. England has a kind of welfare system that no one talks about cutting down too much, or they get into trouble. It has better support for all that. What?
They privatized all their health care, all the hospitals and everything.
Well, there's a resistance to it. Or, well, Canada has it. Canada has it too, and there's a strong third party in Canada. That's one.
You know something interesting? Norman Thomas ran for president 6 succeeding, what do you call it? Elections. That's it. And virtually every one of his platform planks was adopted eventually by Republican and Democratic administrations, just not with those names attached to it, with that label. You know, well, you know, you've been around a while. You know the games. Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, it's always better to be optimistic, and we have examples. The 60s were completely unpredicted. The 50s were one of the most dismal political reactionary periods. And the nearest thing I can think to the 60s were the 1840s with the transcendentalists in New England and the young people.
But as I travel, I see a kind of...
But the 1830s were terrible, you know, so...
I see a similar kind of counterculture developing in the 90s that was in the 60s. I mean, in the 60s, it exploded out of the blandness and repression of the Eisenhower-Nixon years, and now it's kind of evolving and exploding out of the blandness and repression of the Reagan-Bush years. Reagan-Bush quail. Let's make it a little triple play there.
What would you guys like to see in place in terms of what, okay, it's great to, you know, for people to have equal rights and for the ecology stuff, the environmental stuff to get taken care of and all that, but what do you see coming in place to make sure that the country runs every day, that we can, you know, that the lights work, that we can buy our food,
and could you combine that with what you see, you know, these signs that make you, you know, little incidents of people you've met that make you just, because I don't travel as much as you.
Well, there's the people who kind of had their awakening in the 60s are now, you know, in their late 30s, 40s, early 50s, and they're in all different walks of life, and they brought those value systems with them. And you know, they all have different causes maybe, but with the people in the community, it's like you know, different clusters. Just the way when Abbie Hoffman went underground, he worked with the people in the community. He didn't work with yippies, and as an organizer. And so these people have taken all their organizing skills and the value system, and I see them in causes, whether it's abortion rights or animal rights or the rainforest, or glaucoma. yeah, I mean, in terms of that medical marijuana, there's a big movement growing to decriminalize marijuana.
Okay, so how do we get all of these movements together so
Yeah,
that they
they're all
exercise some kind
splintered
of force?
apart, and the kids that are late teens, 20-something now, how do they benefit from the wisdom that you guys have, having gone through the 60s and early 70s?
All you kids out there, call this number. At the you'll see the number appearing at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to get guidance of this type, the type you need from a legend sitting here with us, Paul Krassner.
No, but
No,
truly,
I know, we're serious,
I'm totally serious.
Yeah.
How can that wisdom and the lessons learned, positive and negative, be passed on to the kids that are coming
Now,
up today?
that's an important question. Abby Hoffman, you know, his loss was on two levels. One as a friend, and two as one who had a lot more to contribute. He wanted to start a school for organizers. I mean, he really wanted to have that as an ongoing process.
Maybe Jerry Rubin can bankroll it now.
Oh, yeah, right. That's a line on the book. If Abby Hoffman threw money in the stock exchange today, this time Jerry Rubin would invest it. But, you know, you start with 9-year-old kids. 9-year-old kids are aware of stuff that we were never aware of until our early 20s. I mean, there's a whole different awareness now. And, you know, I mean, all those guys who had blueprints like Marx didn't know about the psychedelic revolution. Marx didn't know about the feminist revolution. What other revolutions were there?
The Russian Revolution. You didn't know about that it would happen in a country where it would have incredible difficulty in succeeding.
Right, the cybernetic revolution. You know, he had no idea about these things. But I see, not to use my book as the answer to your question, but I do see these parents buying it for their late teenagers or early 20s or even preteens to show what it was like, and I find those kids buying it for their parents saying, you know, this is, you know, so there is an intergenerational thing going on now which wasn't going on in the 60s. That had that myth of the generation gap. And I think that I know that there are publishers waiting to see if my book does well, to see if it's like going to be part of the crest of a wave of a kind of alternative history of our times. And because people don't know, you know, they have very short attention spans, and they get taught propaganda in the schools, and this is almost so I think as they learn about their roots and as they see that it was fun, that responsibility is fun, and I think they'll organize in groups. You're right, it's still, you know, the Chicanos at UCLA were mostly the ones who were sitting in because they wanted a Chicano studies department. So there seems like this, you know, separation here and here and here and here. People are interested, you know, ACT UP is mostly involved with gay rights. But I think, and this was what Jesse Jackson wanted with his Rainbow Coalition, that there can be a coming together of all these seemingly disparate groups. I mean, that's one of the things I'm optimistic about.
But what's the unifying theme or issue or catalyst that's going to make that happen?
Empowerment. They realized that what Benjamin Franklin, despite the fact that he had to be muzzled, that Benjamin Franklin was right when he said, if we don't stand together, we'll fall together.
Oh, no.
I think it has to be
united.
Surely hang together or we will hang separately.
Right.
I think...
then who said it? United we...
Well hung.
I think it was Tuli.
Oh, right.
I think we have to talk about the basic economic system. It doesn't have to be a Marxist change.
I wanted to
but
talk
we
more
can't-
about sex and prurient.
We can't. This is all about sex because sex is has been considered property. We're talking property.
Well,
How much rent do you pay?
This place is $1,350 a month.
I hate to. I'm not going to ask you how you get the money. But you know, everyone.
Well, I'll ask.
Everyone
Well, being
is pushed.
independently wealthy helps.
Everyone
okay.
has to. Everyone has
That's
to.
our advice. Be
work
independently wealthy.
Work for the landlord. Everyone has to spend their lives in a futile or
Yeah.
stupid job. Most people don't like what they're doing. Because there's a system here called capitalism, which is based on private property and the rights of ownership, which are enforced at the point of a gun by your police departments, and are enforced internationally
Right.
by huge armies.
And then
So-
taboos are created to create artificial scarcity of the basic things of life that we all come supplied with, so that we have to buy it.
Well, if somebody comes to your apartment and wants to take out your TV set,
Yeah.
are you going to say no? That's say help
No.
yourself. Help yourself. There's no
Well, some
private
people
property.
used to steal my typewriter on the east side. I didn't like it, but I didn't call for the cops. I was going to send someone away for a year for stealing a stupid typewriter.
All right. I mean,
And if they
that's
took my TV, it might be a good thing.
right. No,
Yes, that's
You
why
picked the
we're doing this thing right now. It's like a
Well,
it's a
we're
revenge-
not TV, we're public access.
This is not television. What you're seeing now, it's not. It's
Well,
different.
it's certainly
something
not
else.
like most television.
No,
is
it's
it?
not. We're
You
uncensored.
don't hear,
We
you
can
won't
say
hear
all of
this
those
on NBC,
shit,
will you?
kiss, fuck, cocksucker, all the
Yeah, and
latest
communism,
words.
democratic
Oh,
communism,
here,
and
here,
anarchism.
say the secret word.
Hey,
Here comes the
secret
stuff.
word, right.
And the secret fuck comes down.
And I want to know your opinion as an expert.
Wait, how many
on
people?
pornography.
How many people do you think see this? Do you have any idea? It's not measured by the Nielsen ratings.
No, well, no, it is. It's just not. The information's not revealed. You think there's
Oh.
something they don't know about what's on?
Oh,
There are 400,000 public
Almost half a
access
million
people
You know,
in Manhattan.
subscribing households.
I wanted to start a program, a sitcom called The Nielsen Family, and I was going to get 100% of the share. But, oh well, someday. Another thing I didn't do.
Well, but on the subject of censorship, and isn't it great that we don't have to be censored on this thing?
Fuck yes.
Yeah. You're an expert on pornography, and you worked for Hustler magazine and
Only for 6 months.
well.
But I've
Because
Six
you're
months
censored,
straight.
right?
but I've jerked off for 16 years.
That's
So
right. So I was just wondering if you could, we're trying to decide, is there a point at which something is pornographic, it's obscene? I mean, I just would like to know your opinion. What is there a boundary?
well, it's subjective. There are people who think that nudist magazines are obscene,
Right.
but to nudists, they're just a family album.
Right.
Like home movies.
Right.
So it's totally subjective. I mean, I think that violence is obscene.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the irony, I think that cigarette advertisements are obscene.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's all a point of view. But in terms of but pornography is thought of as something that arouses the prurient interest. But, people thought my Disneyland Memorial Orgy was obscene, but
it was a work of art.
well, that's the point, yeah. And also, how could it be, who would say in court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are you aroused by this portrait of goofy fucking Minnie on the cash register? I mean, laughter is kind of an antidote to hard-ons. Wasn't it, who said that? Was that Thomas Paine?
No, Thomas in Pain.
Oh, man. You're getting credit
Says
for
everything,
everything.
yeah, he said everything.
Right, Tuli's Little Red Book.
What about,
They
if
poured
anyone
acid on
actually
that
goes out and buys this book and reads it, they'll be. I'm just going to bring this in so you can see the cover. It's got a nice color scheme. It's pink and yellow.
The
And
camera doesn't do justice to the color purple that
no,
it actually is.
later I'll insert a better looking picture of the book so it looks nice.
Did you know the Einstein picture?
The most
that's on there?
fantastic.
I saw that, yeah. I kind of, now I start identifying with that.
There's a story about that.
Oh, what's that? Oh, this is the story of the picture of
The
Einstein.
famous, let's all put our tongues out. And laugh. When Einstein,
What now, Guru?
when Einstein came to the States, he was like very big, very big. And I think he was talking at the New School, somewhere in the village at someone's apartment, and the photographers were all over him, So he'd given them enough photographs, and he wanted to go home, and he was in the car, and this photographer was a very annoying photographer, paparazzo, and he pushed the camera right in his face.
Is that the singular?
I
Paparazzi?
don't know, maybe. You don't know Italian, so
I
you don't
know.
know. I could claim it.
But I asked for
So-
mushrooms and cheese, and you gave me a paparazzo.
So Einstein stuck his tongue out at him, and that became like probably the second most famous picture of Einstein.
And since then,
The
every
other
time
one is
someone
with
puts a
his
camera in your face, what's the first thing most people do? They put their tongue out.
and
they
laugh.
try to
Well,
or
he
kiss
wasn't
the
laughing.
lens or something. People kiss the camera. Could you maybe tell us a couple of little tidbits of pranks Ken Kesey pulled on you? Just a couple of little nuggets from the trove?
Let's see. There was a time I was writing a piece on Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon would, he was like the personification of the Freudian slip, I noticed in my research. So, for example, when John Kennedy was killed, and then a couple of days later, Lee Harvey Oswald was killed by Jack Ruby, a reporter asked Nixon what he thought of that, and Nixon said, "Two rights don't make a wrong." I mean, but it was too late, it was out there. So I had this portrait of Nixon on the wall, a poster, and just to inspire me while I was writing this piece. And one time I came home, and there was something odd about the room. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I suddenly noticed that this portrait of Nixon, which had originally been looking towards the right, was now looking towards the left, even though the whole face was looking towards the right. And, like those ashtrays that follow you around. And so I looked more closely, and I could see that the original eyeballs had been whited out, and new eyeballs had been drawn in the other corners. And Ken Kesey had been around. That was his little private prank, because I'd look to see if my daughter's photo, if her eyes were altered, but it was just Nixon.
Well, sounds the right thing to do. He was tired of looking in that direction.
Oh, yeah, no, I took it as an omen.
And it went from the left to the right, or the right to...
The right to the left. I took it as an omen that his political leanings might change.
Yeah. Maybe that's an omen. Maybe it's like a voodoo poster. Maybe it... no, it didn't really work.
Oh, you mean, it forced his eyes to suddenly shift?
Or that his ideology would shift.
Oh, yeah, if it were only that easy.
He's still up to the same stuff.
Yeah, he's like a horror movie, I'm back.
Yeah, he's spending zillions of dollars making sure that the documents never get released. Millions of dollars a year on lawyers' fees.
Oh, yeah, there's I forget the guy's name who did this biography of Nixon, but he describes how when he was in the office with John Dean, he said, "John, I want you to give me a complete report on this, but make it incomplete." He's a walking paradox.
Well, we're still paying his pension and I think his medical expenses.
Are you still paying your taxes?
No comment.
Oh, here's that we again. You were complaining.
This is a censorship here. I give him permission. He can say whatever he wants on this show, because we're not censored. We only have one C word, one C word, and that's commercialism, and everything else is go. But you were censored one time for calling Lenny Bruce a Nazi.
Oh, yeah, that was on the old Les Crane show. I don't know if anybody remembers him, but he was sort of like the Ken doll in the Barbie set. And I was talking about how I didn't think I was Jewish because Judaism is a religion, and I didn't believe in the tenets of that religion. And to say that I was Jewish anyway would make it seem like a race. How did I get Lenny into that? I forget. Oh, I know. Lenny Bruce sent. Lenny Bruce somehow agreed with that or something. But anyway, I said, therefore, Lenny Bruce is a Nazi.
Oh, it's one of those logic things.
Yeah, a syllogism. So Les Crane pressed the button. We were on 7-second delay, and I said, "What'd you do that for?" He said, "Paul, that's actionable." And I said, "Can you imagine Lenny Bruce suing me because I called him a Nazi?" But
that's the humor. That's the point of the humor.
Yeah, that they operate out of fear rather than trusting the audience.
Fear is the element. I thought the element of humor is when you get it.
No.
At the point when you get it, then it's funny.
Well, but humor is the antidote to fear, and obviously he still wanted to keep the disease.
It does. Laughing actually releases chemicals, special chemicals.
Endorphins. That hearty laughter can get you very, very high.
That's true. We should try just laughing for about 30 seconds.
Did you know the government is going around to schoolyards now with their campaign? If somebody comes up to you, anybody comes up to you in the schoolyard and says, "Want to hear a joke?" Just say